a freak when you're singled out. Red filters through. So lay down, the thread is real. When his side goes red again. Seeing red again. Seeing red again. This change you won't contain. Slip away to clear your mind. When asked who made it show, the truth he gives into most. So lay down, the thread is real. When his side goes red again.
Warning: this podcast features adult subject matter, adult language, and things not meant for children to hear. Viewer discretion is advised. You've been warned. Welcome. Helps when you remember to put the microphone where it's supposed to be. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest episode of the What Did I Say show? The show where I recap the weekend's insanity of combat sports events and kind of hold us accountable from our predictions and breakdowns of the I'm No Joe podcast from this week. So before we get into it, first and foremost, as has been told to me by folks much smarter than myself, if you enjoy the content that we provide here on the I'm No Joe YouTube channel, you can check us out on all social media platforms to find out more. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all at I'm No Joe. We are also available in all audio form. If these Instagram influencer level faces will distract you from the message, I understand. Fret not, we've got you covered there as well. Anchor.fm/I'm No Joe for the all audio version of the I'm No Joe podcast, available on your preferred podcast consuming platform of choice. We're everywhere. Also, if you would like to support the channel and what we do around here, patreon.com/I'm No Joe. Excuse me. That is where you can support us financially, and in doing so, get access to the things that can't be posted here on regular, quote-unquote, civilized social media. The unaired and unairable, if you were, shenaniganry from this channel all goes up to Patreon patrons exclusively. So if you are so inclined, head on over, give us a little bit of help. We will give you some content for it and be so grateful. It is unspeakable. But that being said, we had one hell of a weekend of combat sports. We had our first official full event take place at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. And also this afternoon/evening, we also had in the Pacific Northwest, in an empty grain silo somewhere in the PNW, the kickoff of Submission Underground 14. I do have to say, unfortunately, as excited as I was for Submission Underground 14, I have had a crazy day, and in my crazy day, apparently at some point was bad at math. saw that it started at 6 p.m. Eastern time, which would have meant, oh, cool, my camera's doing that weird thing. There we go. But it would have meant that, what the fuck is going on with this camera situation here? Okay, sorry, got distracted by the video. But basically, 6 p.m. Eastern means that it would have been 5 p.m. here in the Midwest. And for whatever reason, in my moment of craziness, when I checked to see what time this all kicked off tonight, my brain said 6 p.m. Eastern. Oh, that's an hour ahead. So that would mean 7 p.m. for us. And by the time I got back to it, I missed the whole damn show. Unfortunately, I have not been able to see the full recap of the show, but I did go back and watch the 3 quote-unquote important matches that we were talking about on the show. So, we'll talk about Submission Underground first. For the most part, this event, unlike the UFC card from the Apex, went kind of exactly how we thought it was going to. I have to say, part of that, I believe at least, is because MMA math doesn't work, but Jiu-Jitsu math kind of does. In so much that in MMA there are more factors that you can't take into consideration when you're doing MMA math versus Jiu-Jitsu limits the skill set, limits the options, limits the attack, limits the time, the constraints that just a submission-only Jiu-Jitsu match creates allow you to more accurately predict or give an indication of how a match might go using Jiu-Jitsu math. But again, not always. So, first and foremost, Zangief versus Mr. Van Zant. We had a feeling that Gabriel Checo was going to come in big. He was going to be strong, and Austin Vandefort was not used to that. He's used to being the stronger guy, and we kind of had a feeling he was going to get outworked, and that's kind of exactly what happened. Credit to Mr. Van Zant for surviving the official round itself and waiting until overtime to lose, but Gabriel Checo is too big and too strong and too technical of a black belt to not get someone like Vandefort and just have his way with him. Basically, he used the official ring or round time itself as kind of his feeling out process to see where Austin's weaknesses were, and in overtime, coming from the back, an EBI rule set, you can choose, rear naked from the back grip or spiderweb across the arm for the arm bar for a starting position. Gabriel Checo started from the back, grabbed Austin Vandeford, rolled him over, slid from one side, slid from the other side, and we got it. It's all said and done. Zangief is a monster, and it's going to take another big monster to legitimately stop him, in my opinion. And Austin Vandeford is a 180-ish pound tatted up underwear model. He's strong for a 180-pound guy, but when you put him against, the 180-pound underwear model who's a brown belt, barely, against a 240, 250-pound, the world caliber black belt, sometimes your mouth writes a check that your ass just can't cash. And Austin Vandeford's mouth has just been out there squiggling like a doctor on blank checks. And Zangief came to collect. And sometimes when you pay the piper, you got to learn. And Mr. Van Zant learned that Zangief is insanely strong. And he tapped him. Props to Gabriel Checo. Can't wait to see, who they throw to that beast next. Now, after that, the co-main event, something that a lot of us were looking forward to for multiple different reasons. Brent Primus, I've heard them say Primus all weekend, and it drives me insane. He has said himself his name is Brent Primus, Primus. Not complicated, but whatever. We'll get to more of that later. Brent Primus versus the 209 Scrap Squad's own Jake Shields, who has been doing fucking spectacular in submission grappling ever since he has officially left the combat sports MMA circle itself. Getting back into submission grappling, getting back into the gi and no gi competitions. Jake Shield is legitimately looking better than he has during his entire MMA career, and for my money at least. But, and I mean, Sir Mix-a-Lot level, I like him big, but Brent Primus is a bad motherfucker, and he is rocketing into stardom over in Bellator for a very justified reason. The kid is young, the kid is intelligent, and the kid is good. He is good all over. The kid's got good striking, he's got good wrestling, and he's a great jiu-jitsu player. Great jiu-jitsu player. So, I will say, all of the matches that we were interested in, to their credit, went to overtime. None of them ended in regulation time. For some of these, like the Checo Vanderfort match, I don't feel that is necessarily a credit to Vanderfort in defending that long, so much as it is part of Checo's game plan in not only wearing you out, but feeling you out in that regulation time, knowing that he gets to put you in one of two positions in overtime. And clearly with Checo, as soon as we got to overtime, it was over pretty quick. We're talking about Primus versus Shields here. We got into overtime. I believe it was a minute 37 for these guys. Started spiderweb. Beautiful fucking armbar by Brent Primus on Jake Shields, who was looking real good during regulation time, but when you give a guy like Brent Primus his choice of how he's going to have you, where he's going to have you, and what he gets to do to try and beat you, and he picks what he likes, you're automatically in trouble. Jake Shields did great, but Brent Primus is a monster. Armbar in overtime. Congratulations, Brent Primus. Jake Shields is not... I don't think this is detrimental to Jake Shields in the least bit. He looked great, and he, for all intents and purposes, like we said, started out the underdog. So we kind of anticipated that's how it was going to go, and it did. Moving along from there to the main event of the event, not evening, I guess still evening. Craig Jones, on top of the submission grappling world, trying to run his only professional loss back and earn that one back against Wagner Rocha, one of the world's best combat jiu-jitsu practitioners and jiu-jitsu practitioners in general. Again, this one, just like the other two, ended in overtime. Regulation was not enough to get him there. This one, on the other hand, kind of went the other way of what I thought it was going to be. Watching Wagner's recent matches, going back and re-watching the match in EBI where Wagner Rocha beats Craig Jones on escape times. I mean, I get that Craig just caught Vinny, and Vinny is arguably the best in the world. But, like we talked about, I only give Craig so much credit in that, in the fact that it ended in an injury and that Vinny didn't stop even though he was injured. There's a lot of controversy around that, and I get it. But seeing as how we knew what Craig was capable of, and we hadn't seen Wagner in a submission underground for a little bit, I don't know. I guess the case in point here would be that there's even no guarantee when you're using jiu-jitsu math, because according to Jiu-Jitsu Match, this was essentially Wagner's rematch to lose, and unfortunately, he did. Again, this time, the regulation time was absolutely a feeling out and a very strong back and forth, but he took the back, and he took the choke. Props to Craig Jones. He absolutely won that match and now solidifies his place in next month's, I believe it's going to be either an 8-man or 12-man submission underground tournament, with the winner to face Craig Jones for, I believe, $10,000 just for that match. So that will be very interesting to see how that plays out. That will also bring us back to last night's UFC Fight Night Apex, I believe is what they were calling it, or what they've ended up calling it after all of the other ridiculously named shit. So I actually meant to do this earlier, but it works out here. So much like the way that the UFC opened their show, I actually intended to open this show and forgot because I dove right into it. But I do want to take a moment here and give a nice moment of silence and a moment of reflection here for the passing of George Floyd at the hands of that police officer. Thoughts and prayers are with the family and with everyone out in the protests. We'll be back in just a moment. Warning. This didn't mean to run the intro back again. So, that being said, thoughts going out to everyone out there. If you're going out to protest, be safe. That being said, we'll get into some talks about the UFC Fight Night Apex. So, first notable thing I want to mention here before we even get into the event itself, the weigh-ins were kind of a interesting thing. The Apex was kind of designed for these type of events, so it was all happening the way that they had anticipated, the way they had set it up. Noticeably a little bit better than things were down in Jacksonville, but again, it was a large promotion and a large event it was a small production in a large event. So it just looked off down in Florida. The Apex was designed for exactly what we did this weekend, so it looked a little more in place. That being said, the weigh-ins were a little easier to follow here than they traditionally were down in Florida with the hotel, and you could hear the echo, and it was just a little odd. But two big things that we got from the weigh-ins themselves. The first one, the thing that shocked me, I guess the most, really, the heavyweights, the fucking co-main event, Blagoy Ivanov and Augusto Sakai. Augusto Sakai weighed in at 259.5. Blagoy Ivanov came in at 255.5. Both men coming in under the heavyweight limit. I believe this might be the first time that Blagoy Ivanov has come in under the heavyweight limit in his UFC career. Neither one of these dudes are little dudes, but it looks like both of them are legitimately starting to slim down. Blagoy especially noticeably had slimmed down. Obviously not a ton because he's still a heavyweight and he still weighed, almost 260. But compared to the guy who used to come in there and say that he had to cut to make 265 or 266 with the pound limit, to walking in on his own, said that that's basically where he's walking around now at 255.5. Props. Mad fucking props. And like I said when we first saw this, if this is an indication of these two big men, these two large up-and-comers in the UFC's heavyweight division, starting to slim down, starting to take this more seriously, starting to work on their cardio and their ability to go a full 15 to 25 minutes, pay the fuck attention, heavyweight division. Seriously, pay the fuck attention, because this is going to be a big problem going forward for a lot of these power punchers in the heavyweight division who have no gas tank. We've seen guys like Derek Lewis, who's, said he's getting serious about this. He's slimming down. He's getting more lean. He's getting more cardio, more proper cardio, so he can go the whole fight if he has to. Now we're seeing guys like Ivanov, who just fought Lewis not too long ago, and Augustus Sakai, who's still making his way up through the rankings in the UFC, starting to do the same thing. And that's going to be something you need to pay attention to in the future. The heavyweight division coming in under the heavyweight limit and in better shape than traditionally they used to is a whole different world that most folks aren't going to be ready for in that heavyweight division. The other thing that we learned from the weigh-ins before the event even started, Brock fucking Weaver. This guy spent his entire week talking shit, talking about how this was his night, this was going to be his coming out to the world party as far as the UFC star is. And he, the first fight in the UFC for him was controversial. There was a DQ stoppage, so this was going to be his moment to show everyone what he's capable of, to just beat the shit out of Roosevelt Roberts and make a fucking statement, and it was going to be Brock Weaver's night, and blah, blah, fucking blah. And then he stepped on the fucking scale. Brock Weaver stepped on the scale at a hefty weight of 157.5 in a 155-pound match. So he missed by nearly 3 pounds, but still showed up to the weigh-ins with full face paint on, with his headdress and his whole outfit. Now look, I get that you're wanting to honor your ancestry, but if you have an hour and a half to put on face paint and to get a headdress on and to get your hair braided, you had 45 minutes of that. You could have been in the sauna sweating off the rest of the pounds that you signed a contract to make the weight of, and then you failed to do so. So now you look unprofessional, and you're actually disgracing your ancestry because you cared more about the way you looked than doing the thing that got you to this platform to honor your ancestry with. Brock Weaver missed weight, 157.5. Bad start just from the get-go. So, we get into the actual event itself. I gotta say, this might have been the first UFC event we have seen absolutely in 2020, but I'm struggling to think back when the last time we saw an event go through with this little controversy as far as the judging goes, as far as the actual scoring, judges' scores go. This might have been one of the most accurate scoring nights for the most part. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination they got everything perfect, because I have yet to ever see that fucking happen in a fight night. But this is one of the closest I can remember seeing. This is absolutely the best officiated night, I think would be a good way to phrase that, both in the referee and the judges, that we have seen for the UFC in a long time. That being said, they opened this fucking card fireworks. And we kind of talked about that on the I'm No Joe show on Thursday. They opened the prelims with this. First off, this was an 11 fight total card. 6 on the prelims, 5 on the main card. And I believe 3 or 4, either the first 3 in a row, I think the first 3 in a row, on the prelim card were all 135 pound or 140 pound, bantamweights or featherweights, how's that? Little guys, fresh 03 kind of fights, the little guys that are going to come out, they're going to go crazy, and they're going to give you a hell of a show, and that is exactly what the fuck we got to open this show. We didn't talk about the first few fights because they were specifically little guy fights who aren't really ranked that high or aren't really that impactful to the division just quite yet. They were just going to be fun fights. Had we had any idea how this opening fight would have gone, we definitely would have taken more time to talk about it here. Chris Gutierrez with the UFC's 10th, only the 10th stoppage in history from leg kick TKO. Gutierrez looked good all the way around. He was better striking. He had better timing. He had more footwork, better footwork, I guess I should say. His head movement was nice. He was never standing still. He was always moving and making his opponent swing and miss quite a bit. But the fucking leg kicks, you could feel them through the television. It sounded like somebody hitting a stop sign with a baseball bat every time he got him. He knocked him down, literally kicked his legs out from underneath him, I think 4 different times during the match. And the last one, it kicked so hard, I swear you saw the referee wince a little bit before he stepped in to stop it, because he was at a point where Chris Gutierrez would literally kick and you could see his opponent's leg just come out from underneath him, like he almost was going to willingly lift his legs up and throw himself on the ground, as opposed to taking the punishment of letting that foot kick that leg again. Unbelievably accurate, well-timed, and fucking hard leg kicks that absolutely dominated that match. How he did not get performance of the night for that, I don't understand, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Next one I want to talk about real quick here. Tim Elliott versus Brandon Royval. We said coming in, this was the new guy making his debut in the UFC, getting a chance to do it impactfully, and a guy who, for the most part, the more hardcore fans, the little guy fans, the bantamweight followers would recognize in Tim Elliott. And man, did he make a fucking impact. He looked spectacular. For a guy who has never been in a UFC octagon before, under the big lights like this, stepping in to do it against someone as comfortable, as much of a seasoned veteran as can be in Tim Elliott, Brandon Royval looked spectacular. Beautiful submission win. Noticed by the majority of the MMA world, both professionals and journalists alike. Lots of fans that were watching this are going to be fans of Brandon Royval going forward from here. He almost lost it and completely broke down in his post-fight interview. He had to take off work to go to the UFC to be in his debut fight, and wasn't 100% certain they actually knew that he was there at the UFC, because he didn't really go into a lot of detail when he told them he needed the time off. He kind of just said that he had some things going on. I guess his boss kind of has an idea that he fights or could fight for the UFC, and then he just left. And he was hoping to get that $50K bonus, because otherwise, he has to go home and he has to go back to work on Monday. He doesn't get to keep training. He doesn't get to try and work at being a UFC fighter. He has to go home and go back to work. Like, arguably, a lot of the up-and-coming UFC fighters still have to do. I don't really agree with him. Like, I understand the emotions in that moment, but I don't agree with him almost tearfully pleading with Dana to get the $50K bonus so that he doesn't have to go back to work. And I understand that that's kind of an odd point of view to take, but at the same time, this is how it's been done going back to the beginning of combat sports. You don't just get to make your debut and then you're a UFC fighter and they pay you enough that that's what you do for a living. There are plenty of fighters who are ranked top 10 even, who still have to work a regular job so that they can afford to pay their coaches, they can afford to do their training, they can afford to compete in the UFC and not detriment their life or their lifestyle, the way they've accustomed themselves to living. So for a brand new guy making his debut to try and make it that much about him and try and play it like that's the path that has been set going forward, I don't agree with. I do agree that Brandon Royval has a bright future in the UFC if he stays on the path that he is, style-wise and fight-wise. He looked very good against a very game, very responsive, very respected Tim Elliott. And he made him look kind of shitty. So, hats off. stay on the right track, don't be such a fuckhead, and you might have a future in the UFC. That being said, we had a feeling coming in. I'd say it's a fairly educated guess. Not so much just 100% a feeling, but we had a feeling coming into this that Daniel Rodriguez, D-Rod Wrestling as they call him, Joe Schilling and Cowboy Cerrone's wrestling and conditioning coach, that even though this wasn't the Carl Robertson fight that he was originally supposed to have, this was a last-minute step up, we still had a feeling that D-Rod was going to go out and he was going to show folks what he's capable of. The gentleman he had to fight on short notice, Gabriel Green, came in like a fucking professional, like a respectful individual, like a goddamn beast, taking I think it was a 36-hour notice that he took this fight on. Less than a week, more than a day. I don't remember the exact time frame, but short fucking notice. Props to Gabriel Green for taking that fight on short notice, and he looked pretty goddamn good. Not just for a guy who took a fight on short notice, but just overall, in general. Gabriel Green looked pretty good. That gentleman as well, I believe, has a place in the UFC, more so than a lot of the fucking Contender Series soup cans we see, but that's neither here nor there. That gentleman has a future in the UFC. But D-Rod, man. Daniel Rodriguez is a bad motherfucker. That dude is savage. He's got great fucking boxing. He's got great foot movement, great head movement. He was very elusive. Had Gabriel Green swinging left and right and just wasn't there. Was beautifully countering. Looked spectacular. Got the win. Absolutely earned it as well. D-Rod is about to make 170 very, very interesting. Not that it's not interesting as it is, especially up at the top, but factoring in the craziness that is about to be Daniel Rodriguez making a legitimate run for the top, and I think he's going to go pretty goddamn far. Welterweight is real fucking interesting right now, and it's only getting better. Excuse me. My nose is getting stuffy. It's allergy season. Moving from there, that will bring us to our quote-unquote premier prelim fight of the evening. That, oh boy, did that one not go as I think anyone planned. Caitlin choke again? Didn't. Against the other UFC sister, Antonina Shevchenko. I will say this. It did not play out the way that we thought it was going to, result-wise. But action-wise, it actually went almost exactly like we thought it was going to, just in the other direction. We mentioned during the I'm No Joe podcast that Valentina is the better grappler, the better wrestler. While the sisters practice literally synchronized kicks, synchronized punches, synchronized moving. Traditionally, from what we've seen, Valentina is more oriented towards the closer of the fighting style. She's more willing, fucking hiccups. She's more willing to get in the phone booth and grab you and take you to the ground and do her fucking work on you. Whereas Antonina, traditionally speaking, from what we've seen, again, anyway, prefers to stand on the feet and piece you up on the feet, but also is not afraid to go to the ground. That's kind of exactly what we saw here, because Caitlin Chookagian, I want to be very upfront about this. She did not look that great. In the moment, in comparison to her opponent, sure, she absolutely kept Antonina on the ground and on her back for the majority of the fight. That being said, she couldn't capitalize on anything while she was there. She wasn't holding Antonina down. Antonina wasn't trying to get up. What she was trying to do was try several different ways and attempts to finish the fight on the ground, none of which were even remotely close to successful. Further than that, the third round, she basically took her foot off the gas, knowing that she spent round 1 and round 2 holding Antonina on the ground, basically dominating that round and fairly securing that round, fairly certainly securing those rounds, so that she had room to quote-unquote play in round 3 and try and make it a bit of a striking battle to show that she was able to just dominate this fight everywhere. The problem with that is, like we kind of led into it here, Antonina's the better striker of the two sisters, and Valentina pieced Caitlyn the fuck up during their fight. So as far as MMA math goes, which I know we already talked about, but as far as MMA math goes, if Valentina can piece you the fuck up, and she's the lesser of the two strikers in those two sisters, when you face Antonina, you're not going to want to strike with her. You're going to want to do what Caitlyn initially did and take her down and show that you have the prowess here. You have the ability to win this fight on your terms. For whatever reason, that's not what Caitlyn did. Caitlyn took round 3 and tried to make it a striking battle, and arguably 8 more shots in round 3 than she did the entirety of rounds 1 and 2 combined. Because when you give Antonina Shevchenko room to strike, she's really fucking good at it. And she will. And she did. And the majority of the damage that Caitlyn took from the whole fight happened in round 3 when she decided she wanted to stand and bang with Antonina after just dominating her on the ground for 2 rounds prior to that. This kind of reaffirmed the statement that we made earlier, even though we got our predictions in the winner wrong, in that Antonina is the better of the two on the striking, at least from what we've seen, and not so much in the grappling department. I, for one, did not think it was going to be so one-sided in the grappling, but I understand as well. But Caitlyn didn't look that great to begin with. Antonina obviously has shown that she now needs to really get in there and go back to the fucking wrestling in her skill set. But, calm down, dog. Fucking dog behind me going crazy. But, yeah. Caitlyn did not look that great overall. Antonina looked bad, but Caitlyn did not look nearly as great as DC was running off at the mouth trying to make it out to be. Excuse me. Goddamn allergies. Now, moving on to the main card itself. I can openly admit I was wrong about my prediction for this match. Hannah Cifers versus Mackenzie Dern did not go the way I thought it was going to go. In the end, the beginning very much did. The problem is, the beginning is not how the fight stayed. The fight changed very quickly. Very, very quickly. And both in the moment and going back and rewatching it again after that yesterday, in the moment, both parties involved realized what was happening, the point of no return, and the execution of that transition. Hannah Cifers was piecing up Mackenzie Dern pretty well. There wasn't a whole lot of time for it to happen because it like I said, when the transition to the end of the match happened, it happened very quickly. Hannah was looking very good on the feet. And then when the grappling exchange came through, it looked like she was going to survive that very well right up until you see the moment where Mackenzie Dern reaches over and grabs Hannah's ankle, and Hannah doesn't respond. And when she adjusts and puts her arm up to spin and lock it, Hannah waits too long to try and turn and pull out of it, and Mackenzie is able to grab, lock, roll over, and then secure a very strong heel hook ankle lock, depending on how you want to call it. And I say this all the time. I don't agree with it, but I will stand by. I try and give credit where credit is due, despite how I feel about a fighter. I think Mackenzie Dern is a fucking idiot and a garbage ass fucking fighter, and I think her jiu-jitsu is not nearly as good as she makes it out to be. Hannah Cyphers knew in the moment that she didn't try to pull her ankle out soon enough, and once Mackenzie started cranking on it, she knew that it was too late to go and tapped before she took any damage, any stress on it. She knew she had been got, which is one of the things you do in jiu-jitsu. There's no reason to take damage if you don't have to. When you've been got, that's what the tap is for. You've been got. I will give credit where credit is due. This was the first female leg submission in UFC history. So there is that. What I also want to say is that as clean as the ankle grab, lock, heel hook, whatever you want to call it, was, the setup was more because Hannah didn't defend than because Mackenzie aggressively or cleverly put the grip on. I still don't believe Mackenzie Dern is worth the hype she has put on herself. I think she's fucking basic bitch as it gets. She's riding off of the hype of her name and little mistakes that she's catching other people in. And worse than that, the over-under we called was a baker's dozen fake accent changes during her post-fight interview. I counted 10. I counted legitimately 10 different times during the 3 minutes or whatever it was of her post-fight interview where she had changed into a fake accent and then like goes right back to being a little valley girl, and then in a moment she start talking like she from Brazil even though she only spent a 2 year there. And then in the middle, she like goes right back to talking like she's been in California her whole life, and you can't really tell if she's faking either of the accents or which one is fake because she's fake as fuck all the way around. That's annoying as shit, and you're clearly trying too hard to be something you are not. And that, I don't care what anyone says, will take away any fucking credibility she has as a fighter. Hearing those undeniably fake accents and the fake accent changes going back and forth because she can't decide who she wants to pretend to be is infuriating. Now, moving along from that, because fuck Mackenzie Dern. Brock Weaver versus Roosevelt Roberts. Whoo. Now, I'm not going to say that because you missed weight, you're automatically not going to fight as good as you would have otherwise. We've actually seen that go the opposite way more often than not. Usually when a fighter misses weight, they end up winning, and it's at least in some part because they haven't had to do as much strain on the body as the person who made weight that they're fighting did. So that little bit makes a difference when you get to the actual fight itself. But this is one of those situations where you kind of had a feeling that Brock Weaver just isn't taking this fight as seriously as he should have been. Despite all the shit talking, despite the build-up, when you saw him miss weight and didn't really look ashamed or upset about it, and then you saw him at the face-off and he didn't really look ashamed or upset about the way that he missed weight, and then you see him walk out to the cage and he doesn't really look as enthusiastic as he usually does or as he should in this situation. He kind of tries to play Mr. Tough Guy, and you can see a little bit of the act, but you can also kind of tell just by his mannerisms and his behavior that even he isn't quite 100% solid and certain in his own ability right now to win this. And Roosevelt Roberts came out the entire opposite of that. He came out knowing I'm made weight, knowing I'm ready to whoop your fucking ass, knowing I've got the skills to fuck you up. And he did. He came out and made Brock Weaver look fucking amateur. And to be fair, Brock Weaver is fucking amateur. This is another reason why I don't believe Contender Series fighters should get to be on main cards. Period. If you came in from the Contender Series, that just means you passed through the early prelims. The prelims light, if you were. You are not a mainstay in the UFC and should not be on a main card until you have worked your way up from Contender Series, early prelims, etc. Earn your fucking place on the main card. I don't want to waste time on main cards watching fucking soup cans. There's no goddamn reason we should have to deal with that in this point in the fucking world. This being one of the few exceptions with that. Roosevelt Roberts has obviously been working his way up and doing pretty goddamn good in the UFC since his exit from the Contender Series. But this is essentially a Contender Series match. This is a Contender Series guy versus a Contender Series guy. That shouldn't be on a main card. Period. Fucking period. I like Roosevelt Roberts, and I don't think this fight should have been on the fucking main card. And I understand that there was also some moving around, and I don't fucking care. Until you have worked your way, understandably and agreeably, up from the prelims, stay off my fucking main card. That being said, this fight was pretty fucking good. Roosevelt Roberts, we kind of knew. Not only did he have the ability in his back pocket, but he had, I guess the right way would be the brightness of character. To do it with class, to do it with style. He didn't have to talk shit to Brock Weaver. He just let his actions do his speaking. And they did. And they very much did. Roosevelt Roberts outclassed Weaver every fucking where this fight went. Beautifully. Was throwing up everything he needed to, every time he needed to, and just outclassed Brock Weaver. I'm not sure what made me more happy, the fact that Roosevelt beat his ass, or the fact that the first thing he said when he turned towards the camera is, "Bitch, I'm about my money." In the moment, it was fucking beautiful. It was perfect. It was fucking perfect. That gentleman has a very, very bright future in the UFC, in my opinion, as well. He is versatile. He is great on his feet. He is great on the mic. And he has got a good fight IQ in the moment. And you can see him adjusting in real time in the cage. And that is a big problem for a lot of fighters. Now, this is where things got a little weird. We kind of knew this fight was going to be a little weird. I don't know that we knew it was going to be quite this weird. Part of that, to be fair, might be because this was a catchweight fight. This was a 150-pound catchweight fight. But part of that is because Spike Carlyle is a fucking weird dude, regardless of the weight that he is at. Spike Carlyle, the alpha ginger, is a fucking weird dude. We almost called him down to a T. He absolutely, the entire fucking fight, spent more time, effort, and energy trying to be flashy and showy than he ever did trying to be serious and trying to win the fight. And the sad thing is, had he devoted as much of that energy as he did to being showy and to being flashy, to actually winning this fight, he probably could have. He legitimately probably could have easily won this fight, but that's not his style, and he's one of those guys who would legitimately rather give you a show than win a fight. very Nate Landwehr-esque, very similar in that they understand that they're in a fight, but they want to be known more for entertainment than their fighting ability, it seems. I will say this, Nate Landwehr has a lot more room to talk in that vein, in the entertainment aspect of it, based on the work that he does in the fight, than Spike Carlisle does. Because the Alpha Ginger, while arguably somewhat entertaining, is annoying about it in that he doesn't earn that right to do the flashy moves, to do the showy moves. The reason that Anthony Pettis gets credit for that off the cage jump is because he set that up with a great fight. The reason GSP always got credit for that fucking unstoppable Superman punch was because it came out of nowhere. It was set up. It wasn't something that he did so that you could see that he could do that. And that's what Spike Carlisle's entire fight prowess feels like. It doesn't feel like he's fighting to win the fight. It doesn't feel like he's fighting to make a name for himself. It feels like he is out there being very much a WWE star in the UFC. He's more worried about the grandstanding, about the grandiose presentation of the fight than actually winning the fight. And that absolutely showed in Billy, whose name we have been clarified by him, Quarantillo. Not Quarantillo, as the rest of the world pronounces it based on precedent, but Quarantillo. Like Billy says it, so, okay. Billy Quarantillo looked very good in that fight. He was very composed. He came in very articulate. He stayed very crisp in his striking and his counters. He also looked very, very good on the ground, both in his offense and his defense, because Spike Carlisle, the idiot that he is still very, very strong. And he showed that at several points in time where he would literally explode out of a position or explode against Billy while he was trying to do something. He just clearly has no concept of pace and gas tank. He also very clearly doesn't understand his own personal cardio level versus the output volume that he attempts. He gassed so fucking hard. I will say, between the Travis Brown, Fabricio Verdum-esque fucking flying kick he opened the fight with, and his many rollouts and breakaways during the match itself, he showed that he is a very strong individual. But the way that Billy was able to manhandle and counter him also showed that Spike does not understand his own energy consumption rate. I'm not sure if that's an issue with him or his corner, but that has to be addressed if Spike Carlisle wants a future in the UFC. On the other hand, Billy Quarantillo looked fucking great. Looked like a seasoned fucking veteran, understood that Spike was coming in with some bullshit, was able to stay calm, was able to logically and intelligently work through and around the bullshit that Spike still put up, and absolutely, undeniably won that fight in a very meticulous and calculated fashion. And my hat is the fuck off to him. For my money, for the money of most of the journalists in the post-fight press conference who spoke with Dana, and most of the people that I watched the fight with, this was fight of the night. These two guys went the fuck at it, went hard at it the whole fucking fight. It was kind of easy to tell where the fight was going to go, but it wasn't any way at all how we planned or how we thought it might get there. And it was an absolute great match to watch, and I think it showed more for Billy as far as how he handled it than anything. Spike Carlisle needs to get his conditioning in shape, needs to get his conditioning in line, needs to get his corner, or I guess I should say his corner needs to get him in line if he's going to stay in the UFC. Billy, on the other hand, polish up a couple edges here and there, that guy's going to be a very serious contender in the featherweight division, I believe. Now, this brings us to the big boys that we talked about earlier here. Blagoy Ivanov and Augusto Sakai. No one, including the commentators, expected this to be a full 3-round fight. I believe the exact words from the opening was, "Don't blink because this is 3 possible rounds, but I don't think we'll need them." No one expected this fight to go to the judges. Everyone thought that this fight was going to be over first round for the most part, maybe early second with a little bit of a feeling out process for the first round. That's not at all how it fucking happened, which again is a great case to be made why MMA math doesn't rarely ever work. Once in a great while, yes, great while, but those times are very few and far, far between. This is a good example of that. We had a feeling that Augusto Sakai, I did at least, was going to be able to come in and negate the sambo ability of Blagoy and impose his stronger jiu-jitsu and better striking to get an easy victory. He did end up getting the victory, but it was far from easy and it was far from imposing. It was a great back and forth through most of the fight. Blagoy Ivanov looked like a heavyweight Floyd Mayweather. Every time Augusto Sakai would throw, Ivanov was just far enough back to where the punch would just go right in front of him, and his head movement and his foot movement were unbelievable. It was better than we have ever seen Blagoy Ivanov look. He was just dancing for the most part around Sakai's strikes, countering very nicely, getting in there. But Augusto Sakai was still throwing more strikes. He was still landing more strikes, even though he was missing some as well. The biggest controversy in the match was in round 3, when it starts to look like Blagoy is really getting the better of the exchanges, is starting to look fresher despite the amount of exchanges we've seen so far, and then goes for a takedown. And Sakai grabs the fence and almost completely stops the takedown. Still ends up on the ground, but ends up getting a warning from the referee based on the fact that everyone saw him grab the cage. It's been discussed since then, and I 100% agree with that assessment that should have been a moment to take a point. I get that it was a warning and that sometimes a warning is more appropriate than a point, but the amount of difference this cage grab, this takedown stoppage had on the end of a fight that was already transitioning arguably back and forth was significant. I feel like that should have been a point taken. Had that been a point taken, we most likely would have seen a different outcome, because this fight, like I said, went to the judges. Excuse me. The biggest controversy about this fight going to the judges wasn't the fact that the fight went to the judges. This was the only time on this card where every single person in that arena and watching at home had to stop and scratch their head and go, wait, what the fuck did they just say? When the fight itself was over, we were discussing in the group of people, I think there was a half a dozen of us or so that were watching it together. That fight was close enough. Arguably, the decision could have gone to either one of them, and you can't really be mad about it. Both of them put out 100% effort, and both of them battled very, very closely back and forth. The problem comes into the way that the judges broke down their scoring when we got to the end, because, like I said, it went to the decision. 29-28, Sakai. 29-28, Sakai. 30-27, Ivanov. In a match that was arguably close enough by everyone who watched, the commentators themselves, and other various professionals in the industry. That was a 29-28 victory. Could have been a split 29-28 on all three, But there was no world, there is no universe in which you watch that fight and decide that that was 10-9, 10-9, 10-9, even off, all 3 rounds. Every round was close. 3 was absolutely even off, 10-9, close, but 10-9, even off. Round 1, the way that they came out, was absolutely 10-9 Sakai. Close, but 10-9 Sakai. 2 is the round where it was debatable, and it could have gone either way. But no matter how you look at it, there is no situation where it's 30-27 on either side winning. Either way, that's a bullshit decision, whether it was for Ivanov or that was for Sakai. There is no fucking way that fight was a discernible 10-9, 10-9, 10-9 for either party. Like I said earlier, this was one of the best overall nights in terms of judging and refereeing, with the exception of this match right here. Now, I'm not saying Sakai didn't win that fight. I absolutely agree that it could have gone either way. 100% 29-28 split decision for either side, and I would not have been mad. But we still have to talk about the fact that even though the other decisions on this card we saw went good, that one of those judges saw this fight as 30-27 for either party. We still don't have good officiates in all matches, even when we get back home to Vegas after all of the fucking waiting and controversy we've seen since the last time we were in Vegas. We're still not back to good. Maybe in the future, but we're not quite there yet. Now, that will bring us to the main event of the evening. The reason for the season, the title card, the marquee banner for the Apex show. The first official full UFC event from the Apex. Tyron Woodley versus Gilbert Burns. The Chosen One versus Dorino. I don't know that anyone saw this fight going the way that it did. There are some people that had guessed this would be the outcome, but even the people that guessed and thought that this would be the outcome did not see it happening the way that it happened. I don't know that anyone really thought that this fight, of all the fights on the card, was going to go to the judges here. I don't think anyone anticipated these two power striking monsters to make it to the 5th round. And to be fair, during this fight, I had a friend of mine and his wife and their 2-year-old come over to hang out to catch the end of the fights as they were passing through the neighborhood. We hadn't seen each other in a while, so yeah, come on over, hang out, we'll watch the fights and shoot the shit. And then right as round 5 started, the 2-year-old just wasn't having it, started deciding that it was time for her to have her fun, regardless of what anyone else thought, so chaos ensued, and ended up, my friend and his wife and their baby ended up having to leave, but in the process of the baby not having it, and them leaving, and the goodbyes and the whatnots, I missed literally all of round 5, save for the opening bell and the closing bell. When I was walking back in, as I walked them out, because I'm a polite fucking host, when I walked them out, I came back in the house, I literally walked in and heard the final bell and went, oh, that fight went to 5? I bet Woodley still lost, because up until the last part that I actually got to watch in the moment, Tyron Woodley did not look like Tyron Woodley. Tyron Woodley showed up looking like the same guy we saw in that fight against Kamaru Usman, where he was headhunting. He wasn't getting on the bike and staying where he wants to be. He was letting himself get walked into situations where he was open for good shots. The only thing I will say is that Tyron did use a bit of wrestling in both offensive and defensive in this match, and that part of Tyron's game still looked okay. But for me, it was everything around that. We know Tyron can wrestle. We knew Tyron could wrestle. The reason that he lost his fucking belt is because he didn't wrestle. He let a guy smaller than him, less experienced than him, out-wrestle him in his world. And it cost him his belt. He was headhunting. He was looking for one big shot. He wasn't looking to do what got him to the dance. The wrestling that he uses, the aggressive striking that he uses, the mixing up of the striking and the wrestling to set up combos and to put pressure on you that you can't respond to. And being as how he's broke and he's fucking hungry, that's what we thought we were going to see. We thought we were going to see that old Tyron Woodley, that hungry fucking charging bull that would come in and fucking stop you, whether you wanted to or not, like the Robbie Lawler fight. That is not at all what we fucking saw. He was hesitant. He was shopping for a headshot instead of trying to set up a headshot. He didn't use his wrestling engagively. I don't even know if that's really a word. But to engage his striking or coming off of his striking for a smoother transition, smoother setups, and not to the same extent, but in the same notion of the Chookagian-Shevchenko fight, Gilbert Burns didn't look as good as Tyron looked bad. Gilbert Burns did look good, and I make no mistakes about that. I was wrong. I'm willing to admit it. Gilbert Burns did look pretty good in what he was doing. But he did not look as good in what he was doing as Tyron looked bad in what he was doing, if that makes sense. We said it from the beginning. This was Tyron's fight to lose. And I believe he did. He gave away his own victory. You could tell right out of the gate, this was not the Tyron Woodley that we were used to seeing walk in and just be dominant. He looked gun-shy from the get-go, and the time off didn't help him. He was out for 16 months since the last time we saw him. And this didn't help. Now, the last thing I will give you folks before I leave, I call it for an evening, is the determinations of the bonuses for the evening. I don't agree with these at all, really, at all, period. I don't agree with any of these. I don't agree with either of the performances, and I don't agree with Fight of the Night. I'll tell you what they are, and then I will tell you why I don't agree with that. Performance of the night was Mackenzie Dern and Gilbert Burns. I don't believe Mackenzie Dern earned performance of the night on an ankle lock that Hannah Cyphers knew in the moment she shouldn't have put herself into and was beating the shit out of Mackenzie Dern, was outstriking her up until that moment. I don't believe that earns you a performance of the night. Burns, like I said, did good. Not performance of the night good. Chris Gutierrez should have got performance of the night for opening the card with the 10th UFC history leg kick TKO. D-Rod could have gotten performance of the night for a beautiful fucking clinic. But he didn't. Fight of the night is probably my biggest issue. Fight of the night went to Tim Elliott versus Brandon Royval. On one hand, I'm happy that they gave them Fight of the Night so that Brandon Royval got that $50K. I don't agree with the begging. I don't agree with the crying. I understand it, but I don't agree with it. And I don't think that rewarding that is the right way to go about it. But I also don't agree that there is a fucking chance in hell that Tim Elliott versus Royval fight was better than the Spike Carlisle-Billy Quarantillo fight. And the journalists in the post-fight press conference told Dana that as well. To his credit, Dana made a point to say that he agrees, or that he can understand that and thinks that they might have got it wrong, and says that he will make sure to take care of Billy and Spike with some kind of an unofficial bonus afterwards regardless. So I'll give him that. But the fact that he said flat out that he, Sean Shelby, and Mick Maynard, the three of them agreed that the Elliott versus Royval fight was better than that Quarantillo versus Carlisle fight, or that the Gutierrez fight wasn't even mentioned in the conversation for any of these bonuses, shows me that we still have a lot to work on in terms of getting things done. But that's all we've got for this particular episode. So I'm going to go ahead and call it all for now. If you guys appreciate what I'm doing here, maybe give me a thumbs up. If you agree with or understand how I'm getting to the conclusions that I am, and you can agree with some of them, or at least how I get there, subscribe. We do this every week that there's an I'm No Joe podcast, and every week that there's an event, we do an I'm No Joe podcast. If I gave you some points of view, or I helped you get that aha moment from what I'm breaking down for you here, share an episode of the show. Any episode, I don't care. We're trying to grow this thing. On the other side of that coin, if I'm just a dumbass sitting in front of a webcam giving breakdowns that don't make any fucking sense, give me a thumbs down, because I earned it and I won't dispute it. But that being said, I am going to call this all for now. So until next time, remember, don't let ignorance stop you. You can root for anything. Unless you still think it's coincidence how Dana came into Fight Island.
Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening.
Give me one reason to stay here, then I'll turn right back around. Give me one reason to stay here, then I'll turn right back around. Said I don't wanna leave you lonely. You gotta make me change my mind. Baby, I've got your number, and I know that you've got mine. I called too many times. You got to call me, baby. You can call me anytime. You got to call me. Give me one reason to stay here, and I'll turn right back around. Give me one reason to stay here. Oh, I'll turn right back around. How do I say goodbye to what we had? The good times.